I'm bringing you must start and sit wide receivers for week 9 of the fantasy football season. We will go through all 28 teams playing this week, all 14 matchups. At the end of this video, you will have heard about 60 plus wide receivers. Consider this your complete guide to the wide receiver position for week 9 of the fantasy football season. Friendly reminder, we have 4 teams on bye and some crucial wide receivers will not be available in your starting lineups. The Broncos, Lions, Jaguars, and 49ers are all on bye, meaning you will not have Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Amon-Ra, that's a huge one, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, Brandon Ayuk, another huge one, and of course, Deebo Samuel. All those players will be unavailable. So today, hopefully, I'm going to help you set your lineup to the optimal lineup, if you will. All right, the first matchup we're going to look at is Thursday Night Football, and it is not the most exciting matchup. Unless, of course, you're a Titans or a Steelers fan. This is Titans at Steelers. The over-under is 36.5 points, and the Steelers are favored at home. This is the lowest over-under of the week. Amazon Prime pulling out all the stops to get us this matchup of some superheroes. No, I'm sorry, Titans and Steelers fan. I'm sure it will be a fine matchup, but the good news, at least for wide receivers in this matchup, is that both of these teams are a great matchup for fantasy wide receivers. The Titans give up the 7th most points to wide receivers, and the Steelers give up the 4th most points to wide receivers. So this is a top 7 matchup on both sides. Let's start with the Titans. DeAndre Hopkins. You got to move him into that must-start category. Went absolutely crazy last week with Will Levis. 4 receptions, 128 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, how likely is it that he repeats a 4 reception for 128 yards and 3 touchdown performance? Very unlikely. In fact, I'll go out on a limb and say that that will not happen again. Don't expect the same game. However, even with lowered expectations compared to last week, I don't see how you could sit this guy in a 12-man format. He's got to be in your lineup based off what we saw Will Levis could do for him. Look at his averages with Tannehill this year and then Will Levis this year. His targets per game, not as much with Levis, but he's doing more with him. Almost the same amount of receptions per game on less targets. His receiving yards, way down with Tannehill, and his fantasy points per game way down with Tannehill. Now, of course, that is a 1-game sample size. Again, lower expectations. Guys, honestly, Will Levis could be absolutely awful in this game. He truly could. But based off what we've seen and what we currently know in a 12-man format, I doubt most people have a better option. Start him in your lineups. Now, I do like Treylon Burks as a long-term asset, but you can't put him in any starting lineup this week. Now, as far as the Steelers go, Deontay Johnson is the only must start for me. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that I don't think Kenny Pickett plays. If he does, then you can go ahead and label Deontay and Pickens a must start. However, I don't really like George Pickens with Mitch Trubisky. Let's look at these splits. For George Pickens, you can see out of split. Out of split means games where he's played with Mitch Trubisky. 4 games with Mitch Trubisky in the last 2 years. He's averaging a measly 4.7 points per game. He's not getting many targets, not getting a lot of yardage. Now, of course, we have to recognize that Pickens was a rookie the last time Trubisky started, but still there's not that chemistry there. Whereas if you look at Deontay Johnson in the last 2 years, 15 games on the left-hand side, 15 games with Kenny Pickett, under 10 PPR points per game. But 4 games with Mitch Trubisky, look at that. Almost 16 points per game. Mitch Trubisky has that chemistry with Deontay Johnson, and I think he's going to get peppered with targets. 14 targets last week. I think Pickens gets, a heavier share this week, but I feel better about starting Deontay. You guys let me know what you think in the comments below. All right, let's get on to the Sunday games, and we have our first ever, I think this is the first ever, let me know if I'm wrong, the first ever game in Germany. Could be wrong, let me know. But this is a early morning game for anyone out there. Let me know what you guys think. Do you like these London games, the Germany games? Do you enjoy waking up and having football that early? For me, I'm not a huge fan because where I live, it starts at 1:30 a.m. But your boy's up and watching it. We gots to. The good news is that Germany is getting one hell of a matchup. This is ideal. I don't think London's ever presented a matchup like this for people in England. But Dolphins at the Chiefs. Over-under is 50.5 points. The Chiefs are favored, and it's the highest over-under of the week. So Vegas is telling us the most fantasy points this week are likely to come from this matchup. And it makes sense because we got two very, very good teams. As far as the Dolphins go, do you need me to tell you to start the wide receiver one in Tyreek Hill? No, you don't need me to do that. You start him. And as far as Jalen Waddle, a name that we have been encouraging you guys to buy, even though he had a rough start this year. Check this out. From week 5 onwards, the wide receiver 9 in fantasy football, averaging 17.5 PPR points per game. He's got to be locked into your lineups. As far as the Kansas City side of the ball, I really love Rashee Rice in this game. I'm labeling him a must start this week. 5 of 8 games, over 10 PPR points for Rashee Rice. And last week, it didn't really live up to the hype. However, I'm looking at a potential shootout here in Germany. We know the Dolphins are going to be able to put up points, and we know what Patrick Mahomes is capable of. In a potential shootout, Rashee Rice becomes very necessary for the Chiefs to have a shot at a win. I'd expect him to get a healthy amount of targets, and I would expect Andy Reid to be scheming him up all game. You can start Rashee Rice, say that 3 times fast, Rashee Rice with confidence in your lineups. But of course, there's not another Chiefs wide receiver you can really consider. All right, the next matchup, this is the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate. Vikings at the Falcons. I don't know about you guys, but every time I see the Vikings, I just get sad knowing that Kirk Cousins isn't going to be there. It's a 37.5 point over-under, and the Falcons are favored. Man, I got to be honest, I'm just sad that Kirk Cousins is no longer playing. And it really sucks for fantasy. Honestly, it genuinely sucks. Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, I cannot label either of these guys must starts. Now, I will label Jordan Addison a spot start for me this week, meaning if you're in a tough position because of bye weeks, you can start him. This sucks because he was a wide receiver 4 in fantasy football, Jordan Addison, the wide receiver 4 in fantasy since Justin Jefferson's injury, and now we lose his guy, Kirk Cousins. You guys probably know this by now. I keep talking about Jordan Addison was a my guy. It was all looking so good. And man, I think it could really implode because how are we supposed to rely on Jaren Hall? He has 4 passing attempts in the NFL. He was not a highly, sought after prospect. He wasn't drafted high. There's just no really way to know how Jaren Hall will play. What we can promise you 100% is that he will not play anywhere near as good as Kirk Cousins. And that is going to heavily hurt Jordan Addison and KJ Osborne. It genuinely sucks, but you cannot consider Addison a top 15 play anymore. So it depends on your options. Why don't you guys comment down below if you're struggling with that question? And everyone watching the video, go help somebody in the comments. There are so many comments. We can't keep up with all of them, but go ahead and help somebody in the comments right now. Look through, see if you can help someone. I bet you a lot of people are going to be asking about Jordan Addison this week. As for Osborne, I just don't think he's as talented. I don't think he's as big of a part, of those big plays, those touchdown opportunities. So he would be someone I would rule out of contention in my starting lineup. For the Falcons side of the ball, I don't see a clear must start. Drake London dealing with an injury at the time of recording this video. I don't know if he's going to play or not. Now, if he does, you can start him, but it's something to monitor. The matchup is fine. It's actually a good matchup. The Vikings give up the 6th most points to wide receivers in fantasy, but Drake London is kind of, just that consistent 10-point play. He rarely has upside so far this year. All right, the next matchup we're going to look at is the Seahawks at the Ravens. I am really excited for this one. 42.5 point over under, and the Ravens are favored at home. Personally, I don't know about you guys, but 42.5 points. I feel like that should be a higher over under. I expect more points than that in this game myself. 2 very good offenses going against each other. This could end up in a shootout. That is what we want for fantasy purposes. Let's look at the Seahawks side of the ball. Now, not a very good matchup. The Ravens have been very good against fantasy wide receivers. In points allowed, they are 27th in the NFL, a tough matchup. However, I believe that the talent of this wide receiver room, as well as what Geno Smith has showed us this year, that overcomes the matchup. You start Tyler Lockett, you start DK Metcalf, you start both of those guys with confidence. As far as Lockett goes, he has been boom bust this year. I can absolutely agree with anyone who would say that. It's true. 3 games over 15 PPR points, 2 over 20 points. The rest, all under 10 PPR points. However, in a matchup like this, I want bodies in that matchup. So Lockett has to be in your lineup with the amount of buys that are out there. And for DK Metcalf, man, as sad as it sounds, DK Metcalf, if you take away his name and you compare his stats blindly side by side with Michael Thomas, you're pretty much getting the same production so far in fantasy. I don't know if it's the injuries. I don't know if it's the addition of Jackson Smith and Jigba and Tyler Lockett all kind of melding together, those three, as well as Jake Bobo, but it's not been a good year for DK Metcalf. In fact, if you drafted him, I have no doubts that you probably regret it. There's been no boom for him. I mean, he hasn't had a single game over 20 points. His season high is 17, but he's averaging somewhere around, that 12, 13 mark. It's not been very good, but this is a matchup where they will truly need him. You can start him with confidence. As for Jackson Smith and Jigba, I would label him a risky start. I love the player. I love the prospect, but only 4 targets last week when DK Metcalf was healthy. That's going to be tough to rely on if he doesn't get into the end zone. Now, let's look at the Ravens side of the ball. The only player that I really want to consider in my lineups, and I think you absolutely should start him, is Zay Flowers. Now, I understand he had a good matchup last week and he didn't come through. However, I think there's context to why Zay Flowers hasn't been incredible for fantasy in the last 2 weeks in particular. In week 7, they played the Lions. They dominated the Lions, like truly dominated them. They did not need to throw the ball. Zay was not necessary. In week 8, they were never down to the Cardinals and they ran the ball all over them. Okay, so in the last 2 games, Zay Flowers wasn't necessary to them for a win. That's just the reality. But finally, we have 2 great teams facing off. I believe we could see Zay Flowers have his career high in fantasy points this week, finally in a matchup where he's necessary, where the other team is going to put up points, where the other team has a fine defense, and this might be more of an even matchup where heading deep into the fourth quarter, it's still a 1-possession game and everyone's at play instead of it being, more of a let's run the clock out for one of these teams. So Zay Flowers has been great in real life. They just haven't really needed him that much in the last couple games, but I promise you, for me at least, that guy is going into my lineup this week 100%. But you can't start OBJ, you can't start Rashad Bateman. Those guys are not getting targets and they're just not putting up any fantasy performances. All right, the 5th game we're going to look at is the Cardinals at the Browns, 37.5 point over under. And this is the largest spread of the week, meaning the Browns are favored more in this game than any other team this week. So this could be a potential, big game for the Cleveland Browns. But what I will say, Vegas, no one from Vegas is listening, but what I will say is every time you count the Cardinals out, they make it a competitive game. As for the Cardinals side of the ball, Hollywood Brown, I want so desperately to tell you guys to start him with confidence and not think about it, but I think that is the wrong process. I really, really do, because this is not Josh Dobbs anymore. We don't have Josh Dobbs throwing us the ball. And from what we understand at the time of recording this video, it won't be Kyler Murray yet either. It will be rookie, guy who's never started in his life, rookie quarterback. My head just went everywhere. Clayton Tune, the rookie quarterback, will be starting. We don't know much about Clayton. All we have seen is his college tape and him play in the preseason. So we don't know what that means for Hollywood Brown. We can't go out and tell you to start him with confidence when we don't even know what Clayton Tune's going to look like, in the real NFL. Do you know what I mean? You get where I'm coming from? So again, he's a spot start because if you're in a tough position with bye weeks, you can throw him out there. We have seen what he's done. We've seen how important he is to the offense, the amount of targets that he demands. However, without ever seeing Clayton Tune in a real NFL game, that's concerning because we have to rely on his play. So attaching your fantasy week to Clayton Tune is just a bit of a risk for me. So in 8 and 10-man leagues, there's probably a better player out there for you to start. But in a 12, 14-man, you might have to start him and just close your eyes and not watch that game. But we're not considering anyone else in that matchup. What I will say is I love Michael Wilson. I've been talking about him a lot on the Dynasty channel. Hollywood Brown is a huge buy for me right now because with Kyler Murray coming back, now is the time to buy Kyler. I mean, Hollywood Brown was so good last year with Kyler Murray and no DeAndre Hopkins, and that's exactly what we're stepping into here when Kyler is back in the next week or so. As for the Brown side of the ball, Amari Cooper remains a must start for me, averaging 9 targets per game in the last 3 weeks. He's been heavily targeted. It is so obvious that he is the centerpiece of their passing attack. And 2 games over 13 PPR points with backup PJ Walker so far this year. So it's a good matchup. We can rely on PJ Walker at least to get us 10 PPR points. And we know the upside is there with a guy like Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper, another name that I would consider a buy low right now, considering the fact that Watson is getting healthier and eventually will be back. But we know how good Amari Cooper is. And there's no one else on this team I want to start. We like Elijah Moore, but man, it's been so bad this year. All right, the 6th matchup that we're looking at is the Rams at the Green Bay Packers. 39.5 points is the over-under, and the Packers are favored, which makes sense because we don't think Matthew Stafford is going to play. It is Brett Rippin season, ladies and gentlemen. And similar to Kirk Cousins, this is not good. This is not good for fantasy. It's not good for watching these games. It's not good for enjoying football in any sort of way. I wanted so badly to say, you know what? We know how talented Cooper Kupp is. We know how talented Puka Nacua is. Just start him regardless of quarterback play. But that's just not the smart thing to tell you. The smart thing to tell you is assess your options. And if you have no clear options, you can play them as a spot start. However, if you have some names out there, let me give you some names. For example, Josh Downs, who we'll talk about later, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalfs of the world, Michael Pittmans of the world, Amari Cooper, Zay Flowers, Garrett Wilson, Devonta Smiths of the world. Those are the kind of names I'm comfortable starting over these guys. So again, both guys in the spot start category. We're relying on Brett Rippin. I mean, we can't just magically expect Brett Rippin to be good at playing quarterback now. You know, Matthew Stafford does so much. He does so much for that offense. He does so much for these wide receivers, especially finding in, the zone coverage, finding the space for Puka Nacua. That chemistry is just not going to be there. I don't expect an incredible game, but of course the talent could win out. So again, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Jordan Addison. I expect there to be a ton of questions down below. Help out your friends, help out the community down below, and let them know what you think in those comments. But I'm putting them as spot starts, not must starts. And in fact, there is no must start in this matchup. Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs are 2 guys that you could start, but we have not seen very good weeks for either of them. Oddly enough, Romeo Doubs has been the better guy for fantasy football. I still think Christian Watson's the future of this team. I think he's their number 1 preference, but he and Jordan Love have not been on the same page. Jordan Love has been inconsistent. He's been inaccurate at times, flashes, but no real consistency. And last week was a matchup that should have smashed for them. And Christian Watson, it was a top 10 matchup versus the Vikings last week. Christian Watson, 6 PPR points. Romeo Doubs, 11. So it's so tough to really trust these 2 names. But again, if you have no clear better option, I understand why you would go ahead and put them in there. All right, the next matchup we're going to look at is the 7th matchup of the week. Bucks at the Houston Texans, 40-point over-under, and Houston is favored. How about that? The Houston Texans favored in a game versus the Bucks. As for the Bucks side of the ball, this is very easy. You start Mike Evans, wide receiver 14 on the year, even though he's already had his bye week, and you start Chris Godwin, who is starting to get things going with Baker Mayfield. Since the bye week, he hasn't scored under 12.5 PPR points. He's getting a ton of targets. You got to start those guys in any 12-man format. Now, as far as Nico Collins and Tank Dell go, it is a very messy situation. Very, very messy. The Panthers are a good matchup. They are a bad matchup, rather, is what I meant to say. For whatever reason, they have been shutting down fantasy wide receivers this year. And that's not something that we gave them enough credit for. I should have given them more credit last week. The Houston Texans tried to attack the Panthers on the ground, and it wasn't as successful as they would have wanted. Now you get a matchup versus the Bucks, who allow the 9th most points to fantasy wide receivers. I would say this is a bounce back for Nico Collins. And as far as Tank Dell, it's a little more risky because we haven't seen him over 4 targets in a game since week 3. And I still believe in the talent. He's an incredible separator. He has great chemistry with CJ Stroud, but he hasn't scored over 9 PPR points since week 3. And that is a tough guy to just throw in your lineup without seeing some consistency. As far as Nico, we've seen more of the boom games. So in a week where there are major wide receivers on buys in most 12 and 14 man leagues, I'm going to consider Nico Collins a must start, and Tank Dell, it's all going to come down to your options. All right, the eighth matchup we're going to look at is the Commanders at the Patriots. This is going to be another tough one to watch, and I'm a Commanders fan. Commanders and Chiefs fan. And I don't care if you don't like that. I lived in two places for a decade. I'm fine with that, okay? Hate me if you want. But Commanders, my NFC team, they are giving up a ton of points to fantasy wide receivers. A ton on a per game basis. They are the second best matchup in fantasy football. But there's really no clear start on the other side, is there? Maybe it would have been Kendrick Bourne. He's out for the year. He got injured. Definitely not Juju Smith-Schuster. Definitely not Devontae Parker. Those guys have done nothing for you. However, there is a name, Demario Pop Douglas. If you guys have been watching my stash videos, I have been telling you to stash this guy for 3 weeks in a row now. Hopefully you did, because last week he had a career high in snap percentages. He had 7 targets, tied his career high. He had a career high in receptions, and he looks really explosive. I will go ahead and stand by my statement on the stash video where I said, I believe he's the most explosive, dynamic athlete on this team. When that guy touches the ball, there's not another player on the Patriots that looks like him. So I'm going to say he's a spot start. I don't know if you want to trust him in your fantasy lineups just yet, but if you're playing any DFS this week, Demario Douglas could be a really sneaky kind of ad based off of his price in those kind of tournaments. But if you're desperate and you're in a larger league, I think you can put Douglas out there and just see what happens based off the matchup and based off of his opportunities. As for the Commander side of the ball, Terry McLaurin has been great. Wide receiver 17 on the year despite a rough start. From week 4 onwards, he's the wide receiver 14. Get this, 9.4 targets per game and 14.5 PPR points per game. Terry McLaurin's been great. I told you to start him last week with confidence against the Eagles. I'm telling you to start him again this week with confidence because he is the focal point of this passing attack, as it should be. As for Jahan Dotson, he's going to move into that spot start category. If you don't have a clear better option, you're in a tough position. I think you can go ahead and throw him out into your lineup. 8 targets in week 7, 10 targets in week 8. So back-to-back weeks with at least 8 targets. And last week, he looked so good. He looked so good in week 8 versus the Eagles. 8 receptions for 100 plus yards and a touchdown. That's the Jahan Dotson that we all fell in love with before the year. That's the Jahan Dotson we fell in love with last year. The guy that we saw all this upside with. I am hoping and I am praying that Eric Bieniemy sees the same and realizes we have got to feature Jahan Dotson. He cannot be someone who gets less than 6 to 7 to 8 targets per game. And the thing that is helping Jahan Dotson this week as well, for you to have a little more confidence, is Curtis Samuel left that game with a foot injury that he had already been dealing with. That means to me that he's either going to be limited next week or he might not even play. So Jahan Dotson, if Samuel is out, I have a lot more confidence in him if that is the case. All right, the 9th matchup we're going to look at here is the Bears at the New Orleans Saints. This is in New Orleans, and the Saints are favored. It's a 41-point over-under. As for the Saints side of the ball, you start Chris Olave. I know it's been a rough, tough couple of weeks, rather. English is hard, isn't it? It's been a tough couple weeks. I'll give you that. But you cannot sit a guy who is averaging 11.3 targets per game in the last 3 weeks. He got arrested last week, came back into the game versus the Colts, and still saw 9 targets. He's the most targeted wide receiver on this team. He's a focal point of their passing attack. You have to put him in your lineup. It's the same thing that we said about Devonta Smith. Don't sit Devonta Smith. The same thing that we said about Jalen Waddle. Don't sit Jalen Waddle. These are uber talented guys. Eventually, they will pay off for you. The difference is Olave is the true number 1 in this passing attack outside of Alvin Kamara, really. So you got to start this guy. They will get on the same page at some point. And it's a fine matchup versus the Bears for them to do so. As far as Michael Thomas goes, it's fine to start him if you just need some safety. He's going to get you 10 to 12 points on a weekly basis, and that's pretty much all he's going to do for you. So if that's what you're looking for, great. But if you're looking for some upside, clearly not the player to go out and target. As for Rashid Rice, this is not a player that I really would feel comfortable. I would say 90% of people have a better start out there. And the reason is because it is the definition of boom bust. He's going to give you 6 points or 20. There's really no in between. He's the anti-Michael Thomas, if you think about it. He's never going to give you consistency, but he will give you upside. So, again, I think most people don't want to have that relying on a fantasy win this week. As for the Bears, I'm sorry, guys. I really wanted to believe in the old teabag. I really did. But at this point in time, I struggle to think that he can get the job done. We need Justin Fields back. And what you are seeing with Tyson Bagent and DJ Moore is exactly the reasons I'm worried about Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and Jordan Addison. You can be as talented of a wide receiver as possible, but if quarterback play does not work out, it really doesn't matter. You are kind of at the mercy of quarterback play at the wide receiver position. You can overcome some things, but unfortunately for DJ Moore, he's taken a major hit in production, and I cannot consider him a must start until Fields is back. He is a spot start. So, again, if you're in a 12 or 14 man league, you're probably throwing him out there and praying for the best, but do not expect a huge week, especially against a matchup with Marcus Lattimore and a good New Orleans secondary. All right, the 10th matchup of the week, and this is the start of the afternoon slate games, is the Colts at the Panthers. Can I have a little rant moment here? Is that okay? No one from the NFL is going to watch this, but can we all agree that having three games in the afternoon slate is worst case scenario? I don't want 3 games. I want at minimum 4. Take a game away from the 1 p.m. slate. Put it in the afternoon. And by the way, the 3 games that we have to watch, Colts, Panthers, that could be fun. Cowboys, Eagles, that will be great. But then we also have the Giants, Raiders. These are not like 3 games that you're going to be on the edge of your seat for. Anyway, rant over. As far as the Colts, Panthers, the over-under is 44.5 points, and the Colts are favored away, so at Carolina. And this one is quite simple for me. You start Michael Pittman, you start Josh Downs, you start Adam Thielen. You don't think about anything else. Now, yes, Josh Downs has moved into the must-start category for me. With Gardner Minshew as the quarterback, Downs is averaging over 16 PPR points, as well as 8.2 targets per game. He's getting major opportunities. The Colts are down a lot in games, forcing Gardner Minshew to throw the ball. He loves his slot guy in Josh Downs. This guy is a safety blanket. He's got upside. We've seen that, and he's got safety. He's the definition of a must-start right now. I don't think he's going to bust your week. Now, if Anthony Richardson was playing, different conversation. Of course, you start Michael Pittman. We know that, wide receiver 12 on the year. You start Adam Thielen. Despite all the talks about, a new play caller this week after the bye, he still saw 11 targets. So, this might be one of his worst games of the year where he only saw 15 points. But now versus the Colts, it's a very good matchup. And Adam Thielen is a focal point of that offense still. You start him with confidence. All right, the 11th matchup we're looking at, as I already kind of spilled the beans on, that's the Giants at the Raiders. Yep, another superstar matchup for the afternoon slate. 39-point over-under. The Raiders are favored somehow. I don't think anyone deserves to win this game. Guys, the Giants had under 10 passing yards the entire game last week versus the Jets. And I'm supposed to make a video and advise you to start any of these Giants wide receivers? Absolutely not. I cannot in good conscience even consider telling you to start one of these guys. And Wan'Dale Robinson would be the one I would choose, but absolutely not. Not with Danny DeVito back there throwing the ball. As for the Raiders side of the ball, I know some people might be upset. They might be, getting upset with me, but I would still consider Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers must starts. I would still consider that. Jacoby Myers has been a great fantasy play, a fantastic fantasy play for 80% of his games this year. We don't throw him away because of one bad game. And Davante Adams, we know who Davante Adams is. They have got to figure it out, and Adams has to be an important part of that matchup. So I just can't sit superstars. We have a saying, keep it simple, stupid, KISS, start your stars. I'm sorry, I cannot have Davante Adams on my bench. All right, the 12th game we're going to look at, this is an exciting one. Cowboys at the Eagles, 46.5 point over under, and the Eagles are favored at home. There'll be a lot of trash talk on both sides. I'm excited for this one as an NFC East fan. As for the Cowboys, you start CeeDee Lamb. I know he had a rough, start to the year. We encouraged everyone, go buy CeeDee Lamb. Go buy CeeDee Lamb. It is coming. And he puts up 41 points last week versus the Rams. He's got to be in your lineups. As for Brandon Cooks, he is a spot start for me. 90% of people, or I would say 70% of people have a better start here. But the reason Brandon Cooks is at least intriguing is because the matchup is great. The Eagles are the best matchup in fantasy so far this year. And while Kevin Byard was added to this team last week, the Commanders went ham in the air. So if anyone's going to be the secondary piece to CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks is that guy. And maybe that's more of a DFS play. As for the Eagles, you start A.J. Brown. You start Devonta Smith. You don't overthink it. Those guys are locked into your lineups. Okay, we have made it to Sunday Night Football. I hope you're enjoying these videos. Do me a favor, go ahead and smash that like button for us. It's such an easy way for you to help this channel grow. Sunday Night Football, we got the Bills at the Bengals. 48.5 point over under, and the Bills are favored away. That was really surprising for me to see, according to Vegas. Now that could change. Those lines move, but the Bills favored away from home. I thought that was disrespectful to Cincinnati. This is the second highest over-under of the week. So Vegas is telling us probably the second most fantasy points are going to come from that matchup right there. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say this matchup might have more fantasy points than the Chiefs and the Dolphins. It really could. Like, two incredible teams right here offensively. As for the Bills, you start Stephon Diggs. I just traded for him in my home league. So I am very excited to go watch some Stephon Diggs this week. And as far as Gabe Davis goes, he is a spot start for me. He's the definition of boom bust. The definition of boom bust. He'll have a game under 3 points, and next week he'll score over 20. Now, the reason for optimism with Gabe Davis this week is, again, because of the matchup. They will need him. They will need multiple pass catchers to step up. Maybe that's Kincaid. Maybe that's Gabe Davis. But either way, you don't get the boom games. If he's left on your bench, you have to discern if he's your best option given what you have. But as far as Shakir, good game last week, not someone that I want to start. I mean, we have to get a lot more consistency before you're considering him in your lineup. But as for the Bengals, this is really easy. You start Chase, of course you do, and you start T. Higgins. Now, keep in mind, T. Higgins last week, 5 for 69, 12 PPR points, but he only played 67% of the snaps, so he wasn't fully healthy just yet. He will get more and more involved, and in return get more and more targets. You got to put him in your starting lineup. As for Tyler Boyd, he's just not someone that I feel very comfortable starting. Yes, he had almost 14 PPR points last week. He got into the end zone, but he only had 3 targets. It's kind of like the same way I feel about Jackson Smith and Jigba. How many wide receivers can be fantasy relevant? So there's a higher chance that Boyd is a bad start rather than a good one. All right, and we are on to Monday Night Football. Chargers at the Jets. Man, this would have been a really fun matchup if Aaron Rodgers was healthy. I keep saying that every time the Jets are on primetime. But we don't need to overcomplicate this. You start Keenan Allen. You start Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson has been getting peppered with targets. Over 12 targets in his last 2 games. He's had another one in week 4 with 14 targets. That is a guy that you want in your lineup. As far as Keenan Allen goes, you got to start him. We know that. We know what he's capable of. Josh Palmer is interesting because he did have that knee injury. He played about 70% of the snaps last week. If he's not hindered by that knee injury, I could see myself starting him in a certain situation. But I would say 60% of people to 70% have a better option. And as far as Quentin Johnson goes, definitely someone you should stash, but not someone we could start with any confidence at this moment. And that is it for today, guys. Hopefully you have enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want a way to support what we're doing here on this channel, we have an incredible website for you to sign up to. It's flockfantasy.com. Use our promo code LAND. You'll get 30% off. And if you choose the higher tier, which is called the Mother Flocker tier, then you will get access to us in a personalized DM. You'll be supporting the show. You'll get weekly rankings, rest of season rankings, dynasty rankings. It's an incredible package over there with some of the best people in the industry. So go check it out. DM us if you sign up. We'll get you all hooked up. But enjoy the rest of your week and go get a win in week 9. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy. Even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.